Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Aaron Gilchrist in Washington. The president trying to downplay a national security blunder after administration officials used the commercial messaging app Signal to discuss highly sensitive military planning. Now, this came to light because the president's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, or someone in his office, inadvertently included the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic in that text thread. The incident has raised serious questions about the administration's handling of sensitive information, with the Senate's Republican leader now signaling they will investigate this incident. President Trump is standing by Waltz, telling NBC News that he's learned a lesson and he's a good man, while also lashing out at The Atlantic. And moments ago, the president telling reporters during a meeting of his ambassadors that he will be looking into what happened here. He also said that none of what was discussed in that thread was classified.
There was no classified information, as I understand it. It wasn't classified information, so this was not classified. Now, if it's classified information, it's probably a little bit different. But I always say you have to learn from every experience.
We will conduct an investigation, is what you're saying into this.
We'll look into it, sure. I would look into it, sure.
Now, the president also gave his national security advisor the floor during that meeting with the ambassadors, but Waltz did not address the substance of the security lapse here. Instead, he attacked journalists. Now, we should note, according to The Atlantic, highly sensitive information was part of these chats, including, quote, operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who were both part of that Signal thread, testified before the Senate today. They were grilled by Democrats on the security lapse here, and like the president, they also insisted that classified information was not shared.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
There was no classified material that was shared in that
So then if there was no classified material, share it with the committee.
To be clear, I haven't participated in any Signal group messaging that relates to any classified information at all.
Okay. Director Gabbard.
Senator, I have the same answer. I have not participated in any Signal group chat or any other chat on another app that contained any classified information. Senator, I can attest to the fact that there were no classified or intelligence equities that were included in that chat group at any time.
So,
and I
so
defer,
the attack sequencing and timing and weapons and targets you don't consider to should have been classified?
I defer to the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council on that question.
Now, throughout today's hearing, Democrats slammed Gabbard and Ratcliffe for what they described as incompetent behavior.
I think this is one more example of the kind of sloppy, careless, incompetent behavior, particularly towards classified information.
This sloppiness, this incompetence, this disrespect for our intelligence agencies and the personnel who work for them is entirely unacceptable. It's an embarrassment.
Senator,
you need to do better. You need to do better.
Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
no.
A national political...
Hold on.
No, you
Let me
hold
answer.
on. No, Director Ratcliffe, I asked you a yes or no question, and now you'll hold on. A national political reporter
You can characterize it how you want.
was made privy
The White
to
House has
sensitive
made
information
clear
about
that there
imminent
was an
military
inadvertent
operations against a
mistake,
foreign terrorist
an inadvertent
organization.
mistake of adding a reporter.
And that wasn't a huge
to a
mistake?
seal.
That wasn't a huge mistake?
Well, I think they characterize
This is
it as
an
a
embarrassment.
mistake.
This is utterly unprofessional. There's been no apology. There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error.
Now, Gabbard and Ratcliffe denied The Atlantic's reporting that the group discussed operational details about the strikes on Yemen. But when Senator Mark Kelly pressed them specifically on what was shared in that text chain, they dodged. Here's some of that exchange.
Was there any mention of a target in Yemen?
I don't remember mention of specific targets.
Was there any mention, Ms. Gabbard, of a weapon or weapons system?
I don't recall specific weapons systems being named.
How about anything about timing? Ms. Gabbard.
I don't recall specific timing.
Any mention of any military unit whatsoever? Mr. Ratcliffe?
Not that I recall.
Ms. Gabbard?
Not that I recall.
Now, Director Ratcliffe did concede that deliberations about any military strikes should be done in a classified setting.
The deliberation between principals in our national security apparatus about whether or not to strike another country, would you consider that to be classified information?
Pre-decisional strike deliberation should be conducted through classified channels.
Joining me now is Vaughn Hilliard at the White House and Courtney Cubie at the Pentagon for us today. Vaughn, what more did we hear from the president about this report in the Atlantic today?
Very little concern in terms of the actual events that played out in the last 2 weeks here, defending not only his national security advisor, Michael Waltz, but also Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the entirety of his national security team. And that goes to include even Vice President Vance. For the president, he did acknowledge, saying that his preference would be to have all communications happening at the most secure levels. That includes inside of the war room, as he put it, with lead wall, lead ceiling, and that he said that there would be a looking into of the use of this Signal app, which is encrypted but is not secure. This is, for the president, he attested that in the last 2 months, they have had the most successful 2 months of any administration yet, and that this was a glitch, an effort to try to distract from the progress that the campaign has made on multiple fronts. And I want to let you listen, though, to National Security Michael Waltz, who was seated just a few seats down from the president here at the White House this afternoon, and you can listen to his perspective on this.
I think there's a lot of, the lesson is there's a lot of journalists in this city who have made big names for themselves, making up lies about this president, whether it's the Russia hoax or making up lies about Gold Star families. And this one in particular, I've never met, don't know, never communicated with, and we are looking into and reviewing how the heck he got into this room.
Now, what Waltz is acknowledging is the fact that this thread was, in fact, accurate, and it's real. And Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic published parts of it, and other parts, he said, were sensitive material, if not classified information, and did not publish that. And so while we heard from the president and his allies attack Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, there is no dispute over the underlying facts of this case, other than whether this was classified information or not. And we heard from CIA Director Ratcliffe today acknowledge that there were discussions in this text thread about U.S. air crews being sent into hostile airspace. And yet, when the president was asked inside of the White House just a few moments ago, very specifically, why and how he knows that this information is not classified, he said, "Next question, please." And so there is a question here of whether anybody tried to retroactively go back to declassify the information, because right now the sensitivity of the information that it was apparently a part of this text thread and was discussed here on the Signal application runs counter to the suggestions made by Michael Waltz that nobody was put into harm's way by this communication.
Well, Vaughn, let me ask you this. Was there any commentary today in that setting, in the cabinet room there, about accountability or corrective action, anything from the president or the national security advisor about next steps, next actions they would be taking on this?
Right. Michael Waltz said that there would be a legal and security inquiry into this, and the president himself said that they would look into the use of Signal and the best way to communicate about sensitive, confidential, classified information. But again, this goes back to an administration, we should be clear, dating back to the first Trump administration, in which we at NBC News have reported extensively on the mismanagement of classified information and oftentimes the negligence, not only within the White House during his first administration, but of course, what ultimately led to his indictment in 2023 for particularly, there were 300 classified documents that were recovered by the FBI and the Department of Justice from his Mar-a-Lago estate. 31 of those ultimately culminated into federal charges for willful retention of national defense materials.
Right.
And so we have seen here time and again the president who ordered those documents to be sent back to Mar-a-Lago upon taking office earlier this year. We have seen here yet again a pushing aside of the sensitivity of the information.
Well, Courtney, let me bring you in here. From a national security perspective, Courtney, what stood out to you in today's hearing? How much is the onus on Secretary Hegseth now to answer some questions?
Yeah, so one of the things I was really struck by today, Aaron, was how the talk of classified information being on this chat evolved throughout the hearing. So initially it began with there was no classified information on this chat. Later on in the hearing, that sort of evolved into classified intelligence information. So it seemed as if Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, and the CIA Director Ratcliffe both acknowledged that they were saying they didn't have any intelligence information, classified intelligence information. But then when asked about whether some of the information shared by Secretary Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, whether that may have been classified, they kicked that back here to the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon is not saying anything about that. We're getting zero response to our many questions about the Atlantic story. Secretary Hegseth is traveling in Hawaii right now. We did hear from him very briefly when he landed there late yesterday. The pool reporter with them, traveling with him, asked two questions about the Atlantic story, and he immediately launched into a criticism of the reporter of the Atlantic story, Jeffrey Goldberg, calling him a number of names and making allegations against him. And then when the reporter followed up again, he very angrily said, no war plans were shared on this text. Well, that's the distinction that we need to address here, because war plans in the military has a very specific connotation. It could mean an operational plan or an O plan. That is seen as the larger, oftentimes joint plan, a larger war plan, not necessarily information or details about an upcoming mission or operation. And that may be one of the distinctions that we're hearing here when we have people like Secretary Hegseth and others saying that war plans specifically weren't shared on this text chat.
All right, Courtney Kube for us at the Pentagon, Von Hillier covering the White House for us today. Thank you both. With me now is retired Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, former Deputy Commander of U.S. European Command and an NBC News military analyst. General, we appreciate you making some time for us today. First, I just want to ask for your reaction to this reporting by The Atlantic.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for letting me be on your show. Let me just lay out something that I think we're missing here. And so we talk about whether it's a war plan or whether or not it's operational plan or what have you. I think we're missing the big picture here. Under any type of operation, if the operation details who, what, when, where, and why, then you are giving away classified data. And so when you look at the text, if it contains those elements, then we should ask the question, why are we sending it over a not approved government communications device? And so if you go back and look at it, whether it's a war plans or whether it's attack plan where we're getting ready to conduct an imminent attack, if it contains those elements, should be number one, under SIPR, that's where we do our secret, or in a SCIF, that's where we go for our classified briefings, somewhere there is DOD cleared, or if we're gonna talk at the higher level, top secret level, then that is called JWITS. And oh, by the way, we also have approved classified cell phones that you can use to talk via cell phone or to text or communicate with. And from my understanding, those devices were not used as well.
Well, I want to play an exchange from the hearing on Capitol Hill today and then ask you about this on the other side. Watch this.
With respect to the assertions and the allegations that there was strike packages or targeting information or things that relate to DOD, as I've pointed out, the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority for determining whether something's classified or not. And as I've understood from media reports, the Secretary of Defense has said the information was not classified.
Are you aware that the Secretary of Defense declassified this information prior to the Cusco?
I'm not.
So I'd like to ask you to explain what original classification authority means and whether that makes it okay for the Secretary of Defense to discuss classified information on an unsecure platform like this.
Well, it absolutely is a security breach when you're talking on an unsecure phone. So if you think about this, there are a couple of things here that must occur. Number one, we have sources and methods. So the targets that they're talking about, we're able to collect by some means, whether it be signal intelligence, whether it be geo intelligence, or whether it be human intelligence. Whenever we communicate in an unclassified way like this, we put our sources and methods in harm's way. They become compromised. And so we have Americans on the ground or informants on the ground that's providing us this information, and it gets leaked out, then they could be at harm's way. And so that's why it's critical that we stay in the secure realm so we don't put our military folks that are conducting the operations in harm's way, but also our sources and methods in harm's way.
So what do you think accountability looks like for an incident like this?
Well, when you're in the military, the accountability is pretty strict. First of all, you would get relieved for something like this, no doubt, because it is a security breach. And second, UCMJ would probably come into action on something like this for someone in the military. But they definitely would get their security clearance pulled from them. They probably would get relieved. And then we would also look at perhaps UCMJ.
All right. Retired Army Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, we appreciate your time and expertise on this today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And coming up, much more reaction to the administration's handling of this Signal chat episode as Democrats demand a congressional investigation. We'll speak to a member of House Republican leadership here in studio. Tom Emmer is next. Plus, President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, will join us for his perspective on what happened and what happens next. You're watching Meet the Press now.
They've acknowledged that there was an error, and they're correcting it. And I would have asked the same thing of the Biden administration. I don't think anyone should have lost their job over that because an errant number, found its way onto a dialogue between leaders. It's a mistake, but we got to correct it going forward, and they will.
That was House Speaker Mike Johnson at his weekly leadership press conference earlier today, chalking up the presence of a journalist on a discussion of military airstrikes in Yemen as a mistake. He also expressed his confidence in National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and praised the strikes in Yemen. Joining me now on set here is someone who was up at the podium with Speaker Johnson this morning, Minnesota Republican Congressman and House Majority Whip Tom Emmer. Congressman, we appreciate you making some time and coming in today to talk about this. I do want to start with some of the reaction from your Republican colleagues over this story that's in the Atlantic this week. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski says there has to be accountability. New York Congressman Mike Lawler says safeguards must be put in place to ensure this never happens again. So accountability and safeguards. Do you agree with that?
Well, listen, the White House has acknowledged this was a mistake, and they're doing an investigation now to make sure it never happens again. So, yes.
What's your perspective on this? The president said, obviously, that he still has confidence in Mike Waltz, that he believes that a lesson was learned here in his case. Do you feel that the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense made any mistakes here?
Well, obviously, they've acknowledged that they made a mistake, and that's what they're investigating. And they'll get to the bottom of it, and they'll make sure that it never happens again. I mean, keep in mind, Signal was approved for use in these circumstances by the previous administration. So whether we agree with it or not, I would imagine the White House is revisiting that issue as well.
So as you watch this unfold, then you don't have any concerns?
Look, my concern would be if we're not addressing it. They've been in front of committee in the Intelligence Committee and the Senate answering questions. The White House has acknowledged it's a mistake, which is the first step, and they're doing the investigation to make sure that they know exactly what happened and to make sure it never happens again.
And what would that look like to you, correcting what happened here in this case? What would that correction look like?
Well, I think it's a little early, Aaron, to be talking about what it looks like when you don't even know all the details yet. Obviously, you know the salacious stuff that has come out, but let's get the rest of the investigation, and then let's see what the suggestions are as to how you just make sure this never happens again. Maybe you have to undo the Biden administration's approval of Signal being used. I don't know. Well, let's see what the White House tells us.
We do know that typically government people who are sharing government information, sensitive information, not even necessarily top secret or classified information, but sensitive information, oftentimes there are prescribed channels for exchanging that sensitive information for members of Congress, for members, for folks who are working in the White House. Is that something you feel as though needs to be redoubled, the effort to make sure that those sorts of conversations are only happening in the spaces, physical spaces where they should be happening, or with the devices and tools that are set specifically for sensitive or classified or confidential or top secret information to be exchanged?
Well, in this case, the CIA directors already confirmed that no classified information was shared. But again, whether this protocol is appropriate or not, it was approved by the Biden administration as a protocol that could be used. Maybe we have to revisit that. I'm going to wait and see what the White House concludes after the investigation's complete, and then we can figure out whether or not they're taking the right steps to make sure it never happens again.
We also heard Senator Wicker say that the Armed Services Committee is going to be looking into this as well, holding their own inquiry into what happened here. Do you feel House committees should be investigating this incident as well?
I'm sure that some will. I bet they're going to be in front of the Intelligence Committee in the House soon as well. So no doubt the House will be involved.
And if this were Jake Sullivan or Lloyd Austin having a similar situation unfold, would you feel differently about an investigation or more passionate about an investigation?
You are apparently jumping to conclusions that I'm not passionate about it. I am. I think it doesn't matter what administration is in office. It doesn't matter who we're talking about. The White House has acknowledged that there was a mistake made. There was no classified information shared, which is very important. And they're doing the investigation. Well, let's find out what the investigation shows, and then let's make sure it never happens again.
And at this point, you feel confident, satisfied that no classified information was a part of the conversation?
Based on what I understand from the administration right now, that is the word, that no classified information was shared. And again, Aaron, I think you got to go back, and maybe Signal should not have been approved in the first place. Maybe, regardless of whether it's the previous administration or this one, maybe you have to revisit that.
I want to ask you about some other business that's on the Hill right now. President Trump is calling on a U.S. district judge here, the chief judge in the D.C. district, Judge Boasberg, who ruled against the government in his Alien Enemies Act case. Called for him to be impeached. Are House Republican leaders a no on that idea, the idea of impeachment for this particular judge?
Well, it's interesting. The judge issued a decision, didn't say the Alien Enemies Act was inappropriately used, and I don't think people in the public understand that. Just said that procedurally some things may not have been followed. That was the basis for it, as I understand it. It's following the normal process right now. It's literally going. It was argued, I think, today in the district court. Or the court of the appellate court. Yeah. So we'll find out what that result is within the next week or so and go from there. As far as what's going on in the House, first, impeachment, you're never going to get impeachment, even if it were valid, because you got to have the votes in the Senate. And you don't have them. In the House, I think it's pretty clear that Jim Jordan, who's a chair of our judiciary committees, going to conduct an investigation into this. And quite frankly, this is what the public has been concerned about. When Chuck Schumer goes on another program last Sunday and says, don't worry, we've spent the last 4 years appointing and confirming progressive judges that are going to rule against everything that Donald Trump does. That's less than responsible. Judges should only be applying the law to the facts as they are presented and then making their decisions that way. I think we need to do the investigation that Jim Jordan's going to follow through on to make sure there isn't a problem, because judges should not be making decisions based on their politics. Justice in this country, Aaron, is supposed to be blind.
The question still stands, though, I think, because we have heard the president very directly, very plainly say impeach. Even though, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're suggesting that the process should play out, that there should be appeals and it should go through the entirety of that process, as opposed to turning to impeachment as a first lever to pull if a judge makes a ruling or issues a restraining order that perhaps the administration doesn't like. Am I hearing you correctly, that process should come before the idea of impeachment is really embraced?
No, I think it was pretty clear. I started by telling you need 7 votes in the Senate that you're not going to get, even if there was a basis for impeachment. So I think it's more important that we do the investigation. Emotions are high in this country. Let's do the investigation through the committee work, and let's make sure that what Chuck Schumer claims is not real. Let's not have judges making decisions just because it's Donald Trump. Let's make sure they're making decisions based on the law and the facts that are presented to them.
Is there any value in Washington, on the Hill, at the White House, and every place in between? Is there any value in even having the conversation, even bringing up the idea of impeachment on an issue like this or similar judgments that may come down from different courts?
Look, it doesn't matter what your politics are. In this country, for years now, there has been a feeling on both ends of the political spectrum that judges have been going beyond the judicial mandate and acting more as pseudo-legislators. You know, maybe it's a good time to make sure that's not happening, because I think the American public needs to have confidence in the system.
I want to ask you, too, Speaker Johnson and the Senate Majority Leader Thune are meeting with the Trump administration to talk about the reconciliation package. Just how far apart are the House and Senate on this particular issue at this point?
Well, the House has a bill that would involve 11 committees and savings and cuts of $1.5 trillion. The Senate has one that has, I think it's 2 committees basically of jurisdiction, and it's got $4 billion in savings total. So there is a gap between the two, and I think this meeting, it's been happening before today, but today is a important meeting to try and see where that sweet spot is. Our Speaker has a very aggressive plan. He wants to be voting on a joint resolution which requires agreement between both the Senate and the House the first week of April before Congress leaves for the April recess.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. So the clock never works in our favor to keep going with these, but we do appreciate you, sir, making some time today and coming in to answer our questions here. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
And up next, what are national security implications that government officials may face using a commercial app to discuss sensitive military information? We'll break it down with President Trump's former national security advisor. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we noted earlier, Trump administration officials are downplaying the significance of using a commercial texting app to communicate military plans and accidentally sharing it with a journalist. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says no war plans were shared in that Signal chat. During today's worldwide threats hearing on Capitol Hill, intelligence officials told senators, to their knowledge, none of the information discussed was classified. I'm joined now by Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor during President Trump's first administration. Ambassador Bolton, thank you for being here today. I do want to ask first just for your reaction to what we heard in today's hearing.
Well, I think both the Director of National Intelligence and the Director of the CIA recognize they're in real trouble if more on what exactly was in that chat comes out. And they tried to confine, after first overstating that there was no classified information that was revealed in this chat, they tried to pare it back a little bit and using some bureaucratic techniques to show they're very worried about what was in there. But I must say, even if you just read the article in The Atlantic, I think it reveals information that at the time it was discussed in the Signal chat would have been classified. Just the fact they're talking about a military operation at all, the fact that they're talking about telling the Europeans and the Egyptians they're going to get to pay for it after it's over, that was certainly not public knowledge. And I think the ultimate answer here, if they don't think there's anything classified, is consent to have it all out in public, which they won't do because they know that it's either classified or certainly information that could be considered sensitive military information that's covered whether by statute, whether it's classified or not.
And I want to dig a little deeper into some of the things you just said there. Let me play first an exchange between Senator Mark Warner and DNI Tulsi Gabbard.
Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not. Are you denying? Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat.
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you
of
refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security Council.
Because it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
Yeah, do you think this sort of makes the point you were alluding to, that the administration is trying to sort of have it both ways here, claiming the information in the chat was not classified, but also refusing to say what specifically that information was?
Sure. Plus, there's another step here. Either the Senate Intelligence Committee or the House Committee could call these witnesses back in closed session. And typically, I mean, supposedly what was happening today was the review of the annual threat assessment, where there's typically a session open to the public where non-classified intelligence is discussed, and then a closed session where the Intelligence Committee gets into things that are not suitable for discussion in the open session. And that's where they could easily say, I want to know everything in that chat, and really put them on the spot. And that's where I think the administration's really worried. Look, there's no reason whatever for senior officials not to use the information system that the government has built up over decades with billions of dollars to have the most secure communications capability in the world. No reason. All of the senior officials on that group had 24/7 access at least to secure telephones and in most cases at their homes, capabilities even beyond that. So it just befuddles me why anybody would turn to a non-governmental system, really whatever they were discussing, unless they were ordering pizza.
We also heard Director Gabbard testify here that the National Security Council is reviewing this matter. We heard President Trump make reference to that today as well. Do you think the NSC is the proper channel for an investigation of how this happened, what all happened?
Well, I think it's the only channel we're going to get in the Trump administration. I think you can count on the Justice Department not lifting a finger here. And it certainly looks like no action will be taken against any of the individuals on the chat. And I don't think anything like that will come close to happening unless it looks to Donald Trump like he might have some personal downside to this whole affair. But the signal this sends throughout the bureaucracy to all the people in the intelligence community, all of the people in the military, State Department, elsewhere, who deal with classified information, is that the cavalier attitude that you've seen here is something that contributes to a double standard. And I'll say one other thing. As somebody who was critical myself of Hillary Clinton for the email troubles that she had back in 2016, it is simply no excuse to say, well, she didn't get prosecuted. We've got to get out of this, the way we look at things through a partisan lens here. From the U.S. national security point of view, you've got to be able to criticize people in your own party when they've done something wrong. I think there's plenty of scope here for more congressional investigation.
If you were in Mike Waltz's shoes, and you have been in those shoes in a way, you know President Trump in the way that you do, how do you think he's viewing this incident, this moment?
Well, Trump said he had learned a lesson, and I don't know whether Trump was referring to putting a reporter on the chain, which, by the way, if you use the governmental secure telecommunication system, that cannot happen by definition. That's one reason to use it. But I think Trump didn't like to have to deal with this problem, but I think he probably believes he can blow it away and there won't be lasting damage. And until that perception changes, these people are home free.
Well, but if there is going to be some accountability, who do you think needs to be held accountable here? Is it Mike Waltz for setting up the conversation? Is it Pete Hegseth for sharing operational information in that group chat?
All of them. They all should know. They all should have been told day one of their jobs, every one of them, that the U.S. government has enormous secure communications facilities, and that's what you use regardless of whether it's highly classified or somewhat classified or you're not sure. It's another reason why, frankly, these chats, I think, are a bad idea. If you want to have a discussion, there's a place for a group chat. It's called the Situation Room. And you can say in there whatever you want to say. People don't talk about what the level of classification is. They just talk and they don't worry because what's said inside that room isn't going to be discoverable by any adverse country or group. That's the thing about Signal. Who knows how vulnerable Signal is? Why do you think it's that much better than 40 other chats, apps that are out there that people can use?
Yeah.
You've got a system the government has invested in. I'm not preaching about these people. I'm not trying to blame them. I'm just saying it's inconceivable to me why you didn't use the governmental system.
I do want to ask you about one other thing in the few seconds that I have left here. The Trump administration is invoking the state secrets privilege in this Alien Enemies Act case that we're seeing in court here in D.C. What's your take on that? Do you think that the administration is justified in using the state secrets privilege?
I don't see a basis for it here. And I just remind everybody, the state secrets privilege is a judicial invention. It was something the courts created, and I think properly so, to make sure that the government doesn't have to divulge critical information. But it's not something that the courts themselves can adjust to the facts and circumstances. This is not form over substance. This is not snapping your fingers and saying, state secrets, game over. That's not how it works.
Well, former Ambassador John Bolton, we appreciate you helping to educate us a bit here today on some of these very big issues. Sir, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And after the break, we are closing in on the first big election test of the second Trump administration. Steve Kornacki at the big board to break it all down for us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are exactly 1 week from the first big test at the ballot box under the new Trump administration. And that brings us to a new installment of our series, America Block by Block. It's an ongoing look at the coalitions reshaping politics in this country. Today's deep dive, Battleground, Wisconsin, where voters are heading to the polls to elect a new Supreme Court justice in that state. The contest has gotten a lot of national attention, and millions of dollars are being spent by Democrat and Republican-aligned groups, with much more of the money on the Republican side coming from Elon Musk. Over the weekend, President Trump weighed in, endorsing the conservative candidate here. NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki joins me now from the big board. So, Steve, President Trump and Elon Musk getting in on this race. Democrats, though, think they do have an edge of their own here. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Aaron, it's interesting. I think this court race is going to test an advantage that Democrats have had recently, see if they still have it in the second Trump term. And what I mean is you're taking a look here at some recent statewide races in Wisconsin, and you look at the results and you see extremely close race for Senate in 2022. Obviously, Trump winning it by 0.9 of a point last year. The governor's race pretty close in 2022. And then you got this. This is the last state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, and it was a blowout. It was double digits. Not technically for the Democrat. They're officially nonpartisan races, but that's in name only. These really are essentially partisan affairs. The Democratic favored candidate winning by double digits in the spring of 2023. And that's the advantage Democrats have had in Wisconsin and nationally the last few years. Off-year elections, oddly timed elections, special elections. The key here is where the turnout is lower. The Democrats have had an advantage because they've had a base that's much more passionate about getting out in those lower turnout scenarios. So take a look at this state Supreme Court race from 2023, just to give you a sense of it right here. This was the Democratic favored candidate, again, winning by about 11 points statewide. And one county, I think, really tells the story of this turnout edge Democrats have had in lower turnout races. That's the key. It would be right here. This is Dane County. This is one of the biggest in the state, Madison, University of Wisconsin. And just take a look at what Dane looks like demographically compared to the rest of the state. I mean, look at this. A majority of residents in Dane County, adults, have at least a 4-year college degree statewide. That's 33%. An advanced degree, more than 1 in 5 in Dane, with a graduate degree or above, a higher household income, higher home value, a little bit younger median age here, and also you've seen population growth. This is the kind of place, Dane, in Wisconsin, and really it's the kind of place nationally where Democrats have been really relying on for votes and for turnout. And let me show you what happened in Dane County in that 2023 state Supreme Court race. Look at this. The Democratic-aligned candidate here won the county by 64 points. Now, it's a big county. That is high for Democrats. They usually do in the 50s in presidential, so it's higher even than Democrats normally do. And then there's this. There's the share of the overall vote statewide that came out of Dane, okay? In this 2023 state Supreme Court election, you know, more than 13.5% of the vote, almost 13% of the vote, came out of Dane County. 13% statewide came out of Dane. In a presidential election last year, that number was more like 10.6. So it means a lot more, you know, relative to the rest of the state. Turnout was on fire in this Supreme Court election 2 years ago, and the Democrats did even better than they normally do. That's the advantage they've had in these special elections. It's something we've really seen since that Dobbs decision in 2022. The higher sort of economically upscale end of the Democratic base, college-educated, higher income in places like this has been absolutely on fire, not just to vote in presidential elections, but to vote in races like this. And so that's what's going to be tested. One of the things in this Wisconsin race on Tuesday. Trump won last November. We're into the second Trump term. What's the temperature? What's the mood for that segment of the Democratic base that's been so on fire for the last few years? Are you still seeing turnout levels and Democratic support like that in Dane, or has it changed at all? Do they still have that leg up? We're going to find out on Tuesday.
Yes, we are. Thanks for setting the table for us here. Steve Kornacki, thank you, sir.
Got it.
We are going to be closely watching this race next week. Still to come, the political fallout and the accusations of hypocrisy facing the White House as the administration tries to clean up that national security blunder. You're watching Meet the Press now. Well, it is a very busy news day, so let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. Joining me now on set is Akayla Gardner, White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, Eugene Robinson, columnist for The Washington Post and an NBC News political analyst, and Danielle Pletka, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. She is also an NBC News contributor. So, Akayla, we'll start with you here. You cover the White House. How has the White House been responding to this story as it's developed over the last 24 hours about the story in the Atlantic?
So really, they've been doing a couple things. First, they are pointing to the success of the strike on the Houthis. They say despite that there was this breach, the strike went ahead as planned. It was not impeded. And they've also been very strategically attacking the Atlantic and its editor-in-chief, who, of course, broke the story. This is a very familiar playbook for the Trump administration. They continue to go after the press. But President Trump admitted that it was a mistake that National Security Mike Waltz made. But the attention has really now turned to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for the details that he, at least from this report, has put in those text messages about specific targets. Those things are really what's become the question. I think we saw that today in the hearing, that there's a lot of questions that are still on him and why he chose to use this channel for those communications.
So, Danny, let me ask you about this, where your concerns might lie. You've dealt with sensitive information, classified information. Are you more concerned that Jeffrey Goldberg was included in this thread, or are you more concerned that the thread happened at all on an unsecure platform?
I'm more concerned that we can't find anything else to talk about other than this, actually. And I don't mean us here at this table. I mean us here in Washington. It dominated the global threats hearing that took place on Capitol Hill. That's where Pete Hegseth got attacked. This is dumb. I don't know which among you.
Wait, dumb that we're talking about it or that it happened?
Dumb that we're continuing to talk about it. Really dumb that it happened. I don't know. Have you been part of group messages? Usually I look who's on it.
I do too. Yeah. I always look who's on it. I want to know.
Exactly.
Right?
So I don't.
This is just friends.
That was a little weird to me.
Yeah.
Using Signal is obviously a terrible idea. It's a bad breach. It's not what should have happened. But I think we've established that. Mike Waltz did something really, really dumb that he shouldn't have done. And I don't think they'll be doing that again.
Gene, I want to ask you to sort of make a comparison here. There were a number of individuals on this thread who were vocal about information security when Hillary Clinton's emails were in the spotlight. I want to play a little bit of a video from what we've heard over the years.
And it goes to the issue of both competence and credibility. It is irresponsible for an elected official in her capacity to be discussing highly sensitive things on a format that she had to have known was not fully secured.
That the sitting national security advisor right now, Jake Sullivan,
was sending and laundering classified documents into an unclassified server, on top of the fact that the sitting president of the United States admitted he had documents in his garage that you're going in and out of. People look at that and say, whoa, wait a minute. There was prosecutorial discretion there. They didn't prosecute. They didn't go after these folks in all of these other instances.
Mishandling classified information is still a violation of the Espionage Act. It started with Hillary Clinton. It has continued without accountability. Right. People haven't paid a price for that.
Any security professional, military, government, or otherwise, would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for being so reckless with this kind of information. The fact that she wouldn't be held accountable for this, I think, blows the mind of anyone who's held our nation's secrets dear.
So you both are reacting as we watch some of this. Gene, right. I'll ask you, do you see any daylight between what was criticized in this video versus what these folks participated in?
I do not. And as a matter of fact, you know, I'm sorry, but Democrats would be, how can they not keep talking about this, right? Given the months that they talked about Hillary Clinton's emails. This is so. Yes, people are going to talk about this because there is a precedent. I want to clarify one thing that Congressman Emmer said earlier, which is he kept saying, the Biden administration said this was okay. No, they didn't say it was okay. What the Biden administration said was that messaging apps like Signal and iMessage should not be used for non-public Department of Defense information. Period. So I guess you could use them, to just talk to your buddies about pizza, but you can't use them about the war plans for attacking the Houthis.
There's a difference, though. I mean, look, again, I think we can all agree that this was not a good thing to happen. When you set up an email server for the purpose of evasion, as opposed to when you CC Jeff Goldberg by mistake on a Signal channel that you shouldn't be using, are two different things. And again, that doesn't, we have this tendency to talk about, well, if they're the Republicans, they did this, and if they're the Democrats, they did that. And of course, the answer is both things are bad things to do. Both things are stupid things to do. We do need to talk about the motivations, but we also, as we all saw, need to talk about hypocrisy.
Well, and also we need to talk about those threats that they were supposed to talk about today. But there may have been a purpose of evasion here, too, because the Signal stuff is not archived in the way that normal, secure communications would be.
Okay, let me bring you back in here. The Republicans, we know, hold all the gavels on Capitol Hill right now. Are we going to see any sort of legitimate inquiry into what happened here, or will it be an internal thing for the Trump administration?
Well, Congress is not saying right now that there's going to be any serious investigation, and the president didn't say that either today. He said that they're reviewing it, but there's not really clear evidence of whether there'll be a formal investigation here. But he did say he wants Signal used less. He wants these conversations to happen more in person. We know that there's already avenues like the Situation Room for these types of communications. So there is some sign that they're going to be reviewing policy, but still he just, again, has really said this was a mistake that Mike Waltz made, and there doesn't seem to be really serious accountability at this point.
Danny, I do want to look at some of the content, though, that we know was in this report, that was a part of the Atlantic story, that was in the conversation that was happening. One passage here that read, the account identified as J.D. Vance addressed a message at 8:45 to Pete Hegseth. If you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again. The user identified as Hegseth responded 3 minutes later, VP, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. We don't often get to see how the sausage gets made in these conversations with high-level officials. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is that if you and I had sat down to write that exchange and we were bras like these guys are, we would have written exactly that. Anybody who didn't notice that the vice president is not a man who is really into our global alliances and who doesn't really have a lot of respect for European leadership and investment in its own defense has not been paying attention. That's who they are. The fact that that's what lent authenticity to this. This is what made me say this is real, because that's who J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth are.
Gene, when other countries look at this, though, when U.S. allies look at this whole incident and comments like that, How does that?
Well, look, that's what people are talking about, hearing from, friends in Europe. I mean, that's what Europeans are looking at. And they're saying, they're pointing, see, we can't count on the Americans right now. And that's what they say. What fascinated me, though, was at the point when J.D. Vance said, well, maybe you ought to wait a month, or we ought to do this, or we ought to do that. Stephen Miller comes in and says, well, the president says, we're going to do it, so we're going to do it. What struck me was the power that Stephen Miller had over that conversation. That sort of ended that. Right?
I think that's true, but I also think that there's been a tendency that we've already seen on the part of the president's candidates to go their own way based on their interpretation of what the president says. Well, yeah, so that was clarity, at least.
We are out of time. We appreciate you guys. Thanks for coming in. Kayla Gardner, Danielle Plecka, Gene Robinson, thank you all. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.